If you protect me from the cold, I will reward you, human, said the alien woman, her voice barely audible over the howling winds. The man stood motionless, unsure whether the words he had just heard were a hallucination. The Alaskan wilderness, frozen and unforgiving, had never been a place for the faint of heart. But standing before him, wrapped in an ethereal glow, was something or someone he could never have imagined. The woman's eyes, glowing a vibrant shade of violet, locked onto his. Her skin shimmered, pale with a hint of something otherworldly. The wind howled around them, but she seemed unfazed, standing tall despite the freezing temperatures. Please, she whispered again, this time desperation lacing her tone. I cannot survive much longer in this frigid environment. Help me, human. I am not from your world. The man swallowed hard, shaking his head in disbelief. He had been living alone in this remote stretch of wilderness, hunting, fishing, and doing whatever it took to survive. But an alien? Out here? In the middle of nowhere? He took a step back, his heart pounding. What are you? He asked, his voice barely rising above the wind's roar. He had seen things in his life, strange creatures, eerie phenomena, but nothing like this. The alien woman winced, her fragile body seeming to tremble with every gust of cold wind that blasted past them. I am called Lyara, she said, her voice soft but commanding. I am a traveler, far from home. I came here, by accident. I did not intend to land on your planet, but I cannot survive here without your help. Lyara's eyes flickered with something resembling pain, and she took a hesitant step forward. Her body shimmered in the light, her silhouette glowing faintly as though she were not entirely of this world. She was beautiful in a way that was both mesmerizing and unsettling, an elegance that belonged to a place far beyond the stars. The man's mind raced. He was isolated, living in this frozen hellscape to avoid the chaos of civilization, but the sight before him was not something his mind could easily process. He wanted to walk away, to turn his back on whatever it was that stood before him. But there was something in her eyes, a raw vulnerability that made his heart ache. You said you'd reward me, he said cautiously, unsure of how to approach this strange being. What kind of reward are we talking about here? Lyara's violet eyes glinted with something unspoken, a glimmer of knowledge and power that made his skin prickle. A reward beyond anything you could imagine. I am not of your world, but I possess knowledge, technology, power. I can offer you things that no human could ever dream of. But first, you must help me. The man hesitated, his mind torn between fear and curiosity. He knew better than to trust strangers, especially ones who claimed to be from another planet. But there was something about her, something that pulled at him. How can I help you? He asked, his voice steady despite the chaos of his thoughts. He was in this now, for better or worse. Lyara's face softened, and she stepped closer, the cold air swirling around them like an unrelenting storm. You must shelter me, she said, her voice trembling. Protect me from the cold. Give me warmth until I recover. Only then will I be able to repay you, human. The man considered her words carefully. He had no idea how long she had been out there, stranded in the brutal cold. But her appearance seemed real. She wasn't some hallucination, and the desperation in her voice felt genuine. All right, he said, his decision final. I'll help you, but you better make sure you can keep up your end of the bargain. Lyara nodded slowly, and a small smile flickered across her lips. I will, she promised. The wind continued to howl as the man led Lyara back to his cabin, a small, weathered structure that had been his home for years. It wasn't much, but it was enough to survive. The interior was modest, simple wood furnishings, a fireplace that still flickered with a faint warmth, and an assortment of tools scattered around the room. Lyara hesitated at the threshold, her eyes scanning the cabin with a mix of curiosity and wonder. This place is humble, she remarked, her voice laced with awe. But it is warm. That is all I need. She stepped inside, and the man quickly shut the door behind her, shutting out the brutal wind and snow. The warmth of the cabin was a welcome relief, but Lyara's presence seemed to make the air feel different. Heavy, almost as if the space itself was aware that something not quite human had entered. "Take a seat by the fire," the man instructed, gesturing toward the hearth. "I'll get you something to drink. It'll help." Lyara nodded gratefully, her movements graceful but still weak. As she settled by the fire, the man could see that her skin was beginning to shimmer less, though she still appeared fragile. He moved to the kitchen area, rummaging through his supplies for anything that might help her. A few minutes later, he returned with a steaming mug of tea, the warmth of the liquid filling the air with a comforting scent. "Here," he said, handing the mug to her. "It's not much, but it'll warm you up." Lyara took the mug delicately, her fingers brushing his as she accepted the drink. She didn't seem to mind the coldness of her own touch, though the man found it strange. She took a sip, her eyes closing briefly as the warmth spread through her body. "Thank you," she said softly. "This is more than I could have hoped for." The man watched her closely, noticing how her skin seemed to slowly regain its natural color, the violet glow of her eyes dimming slightly as she recovered. She was still an enigma to him, a being from beyond the stars, but her gratitude was unmistakable. "How did you end up here?" he asked, curiosity getting the better of him. "I mean, this is a long way from wherever you're from. How do you even survive in a place like this?" Lyara sighed, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames of the hearth. "It is a long story," she began, her voice distant as though recalling a memory from another life. "I was part of a research expedition, traveling across the galaxy. My ship was damaged in a cosmic storm. I crashed here, far from my destination, with no way to contact my people." The man frowned. "So you're stranded? Alone?" "Yes," she replied quietly. "Alone and vulnerable to the elements. The cold here is unbearable to my kind. Without your help, I would not have survived much longer." The man nodded, his thoughts racing. She wasn't just some stranded traveler. She was an alien, and her knowledge could potentially change everything. She had mentioned a reward, something beyond his wildest dreams. What did that mean? What kind of power could she offer? Before he could ask any more questions, there was a sudden shift in the air, a crackling sound that seemed to come from nowhere. The warmth in the room seemed to dim slightly, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. "Lyara?" he asked, his voice tense. Her eyes snapped open, wide with alertness. "Stay close," she whispered urgently. "We are not alone. Something is coming." The man froze, his heart racing. What could possibly be coming after them? They were deep in the wilderness, miles away from civilization. There was no one out here, nothing but the snow and ice. Lyara stood, her body shimmering again, her violet eyes glowing brighter than ever. "They found me," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "They will not stop until they capture me." "Who's coming?" the man asked, panic rising in his chest. "What's going on?" Lyara turned to face him, her expression one of both fear and determination. "My enemies," she said, "the ones who caused the crash. They will stop at nothing to ensure that I do not return to my people. You must protect me." The wind outside began to howl louder, as if in response to her words. The man's pulse quickened. He didn't know what kind of danger they were facing, but one thing was clear. It wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. It was a fight for their very lives. The night was far from over, and the man soon realized that everything he knew was about to change. Lyara, the alien woman who had crash-landed on Earth, wasn't just a stranger in need of help. She was a key player in a much larger story, a story of survival, danger, and rewards beyond imagination. And whatever was coming for them, he had to be ready. The air in the cabin grew heavy as Lyara stood rigid, her eyes scanning the shadows beyond the windows. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the warmth it offered seemed to diminish as the intensity of her gaze intensified. There was something approaching, something that could sense them. The man, whose name was Caleb, could feel it too, a strange, almost electric charge in the air. "What are they?" Caleb whispered, his throat tight with anxiety. "Are they human?" Lyara didn't answer right away. She seemed to be listening, her eyes flickering with a blend of recognition and fear. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. "No, They are not human. They are hunters. A part of a faction that searches for beings like me. They do not care for our kind, our knowledge. They will kill me if they can, to prevent me from ever returning home. And if they find you—" Her words trailed off, and the silence between them felt like it stretched for eternity. "They will kill you too." Caleb's heart hammered in his chest. He didn't know what to think. Alien hunters? A faction? He had barely even wrapped his mind around the fact that he was standing next to a being from another world, let alone the idea that someone or something might be coming for her. He turned and glanced out the small window of the cabin, but the storm outside had grown fiercer, the whiteout making it impossible to see anything beyond the blur of snow and ice. "What should we do?" Caleb asked, his voice shaking despite himself. Lyara's eyes softened, and for the first time since she had arrived, Caleb saw a flicker of something that resembled gratitude in her expression. She stepped closer to him, the glow of her form dimming slightly, as though trying to blend into the darkness of the room. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice firm but calm. "The cabin is not safe. I can hide us for a while, but it will not be enough if they track us here." A sudden crash outside sent a jolt through both of them. The ground trembled beneath their feet as a deep, guttural growl echoed through the wilderness. It wasn't the sound of an animal, not anything that Caleb could recognize. It was the sound of something far more terrifying. "They're close," Lyara whispered, her face tense with a mixture of fear and determination. "They're here." Caleb's mind raced, his thoughts jumbled. He had been living on the fringes of society, trying to escape the complexities of the world, but now, his simple life had turned into a nightmare. An alien woman had crash-landed in his life, bringing with her an enemy he couldn't comprehend. And now, it seemed that his only chance of survival was to protect her. "How do we escape?" he asked, his voice steady despite the panic swirling within him. Lyara's eyes flickered with something, perhaps sorrow, or perhaps something else entirely. "I can only do so much. My powers are weakened by the cold, and they are getting stronger. But if we move now, we might be able to outrun them." "Outrun them?" Caleb asked incredulously. "We're in the middle of a snowstorm. It's freezing out there. How are we supposed to outrun anything in this?" "We have no choice," she replied, her tone unwavering. "We must move quickly. They have advanced technology, but they cannot track us if we stay hidden. There is a place, an underground hideout, not far from here. It will be safer. I can guide us there." Caleb swallowed hard, trying to push the wave of doubt away. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who had lived alone for far too long, and now he found himself in the middle of something that he couldn't even begin to understand. But there was something about Lyara, something that told him she wasn't lying, that they didn't have a choice. The sound of another growl interrupted his thoughts, much closer this time, followed by the eerie echo of what sounded like a heavy object scraping against the earth. It was coming for them. Caleb grabbed his jacket, pulling it over his shoulders with quick, trembling hands. "Let's go then. I'll follow you." Lyara gave a small nod, a flash of relief crossing her features. Without another word, she moved toward the door, her feet light and silent on the wooden floor. Caleb followed, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what to expect, but he had no time to waste. They needed to leave before whatever was out there found them. She opened the door just a crack, peeking outside. The wind was fierce, the snow coming down in blinding sheets. Caleb could barely make out anything beyond the threshold of the cabin. The world outside was a blur of white, and he had no idea how they would navigate through it. "Stay close," Lyara instructed softly, slipping outside and gesturing for Caleb to follow. "Move quickly and quietly. They will hear us if we make too much noise." The cold immediately slapped Caleb in the face as he stepped into the storm. He pulled his jacket tighter around him, fighting against the biting chill that seemed to seep into his bones. His breath came in ragged gasps, the air thick with the snow and wind. They moved swiftly, Lyara leading the way with an agility that Caleb couldn't help but admire. Her steps were light, like she wasn't even touching the ground, and she seemed to be unaffected by the freezing temperatures that made him shiver to the core. Caleb struggled to keep up, his mind reeling from the chaos of it all. He couldn't help but glance over his shoulder every few moments, half expecting something to appear in the swirling snowstorm behind them. He had no idea what they were running from, but the low, menacing growl echoed again, closer this time. Whatever it was tracking them. How much further? Caleb gasped, his breath freezing in the air as he stumbled over the uneven snow. "We are almost there," Lyara said, her voice calm but urgent. "Stay with me and don't stop." As they moved deeper into the wilderness, the storm began to pick up in intensity, the winds howling like some ancient beast. Caleb's skin was raw from the cold, his body aching with each step. He was starting to lose track of time, not sure how long they had been walking or how much further they had to go. But then, just as his energy was beginning to fade, they reached a small hill. At the top, hidden beneath a thick layer of snow and ice, was a large metal hatch, half buried and nearly invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Lyara hurried toward it, her movements smooth and purposeful, and Caleb followed, collapsing against the cool metal as she fumbled with the panel in front of her. Her fingers traced a series of symbols along the edge, and with a soft hiss, the door slid open. "Inside," she said urgently. Quickly, Caleb didn't hesitate. He dove into the entrance, and Lyara followed close behind, pulling the door shut just as the wind outside howled with renewed intensity. The interior was dark, the only light coming from a faint blue glow that illuminated the walls. It was small, barely enough room for the two of them to stand side by side, but it was a shelter, and for now, that was all that mattered. Lyara took a deep breath, her body shaking as she leaned against the wall, her eyes closed in concentration. Caleb stood just a few feet away, his chest heaving from the cold and the exertion. He watched her closely, waiting for any sign that they were safe. After a long moment, Lyara opened her eyes, and this time, her gaze was different. It was filled with something Caleb couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was gratitude, perhaps something more. She met his eyes, and her voice was steady. "You've done more for me than I could have hoped, Caleb. You've shown me something I did not expect: courage, trust. In return, I will keep my promise." Caleb frowned, confusion washing over him. "What promise? What do you mean?" Lyara stepped forward, her presence filling the small space between them. "The reward I spoke of," she said, her voice low but filled with power. "I can offer you something beyond what you've ever imagined. A chance to change your fate, and the fate of the world." Caleb's heart skipped a beat as her words sank in. A chance to change everything? What was she really offering? He had no idea, but something deep within him told him that the journey he had just begun was far from over. The dangers were far from over. And the true reward? He had no idea what it would be, but it was a promise that would alter everything he thought he knew about himself and about the universe. The cold air in the underground hideout was a stark contrast to the frigid wilderness above. Caleb had expected more of a technological marvel, something far beyond the reach of his comprehension. But instead, the space was simple, clean, with cold metal walls and only the faintest hum of some energy source that powered the place. The dim blue glow seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat, and Caleb couldn't help but feel that this place was more than just a hiding spot. Lyara leaned against the wall, her hands trembling slightly. Though the warmth of the shelter was a relief, it seemed to come at a cost. Her energy was still low, and her body appeared to be struggling to regain its strength. Her skin, once shimmering with an almost ethereal glow, had dulled. Her eyes, too, were dimmer now, though they still held a depth that Caleb couldn't quite place. She had kept her promise to guide them here, but Caleb wasn't entirely sure what she meant by reward. Her words echoed in his mind: a chance to change your fate and the fate of the world. The weight of those words settled on him like a stone, and as he watched her closely, his mind raced with possibilities. "Lyara," Caleb began, his voice tentative, "what do you mean by that? What reward are you talking about? I've helped you, but I don't understand. What could I possibly do with whatever you have?" Lyara's violet eyes flickered up to meet his, her gaze soft yet penetrating. "You are a survivor, Caleb. You have lived alone in this harsh wilderness for years. You've learned to adapt, to survive against all odds. That makes you special. And what I can offer you?" She hesitated, her voice almost a whisper. "What I can offer you is power. The kind of power that transcends the limitations of your world." Caleb took a step back, processing her words. The idea of power was intoxicating, yet terrifying. He had spent his life avoiding the complexities of the world, wanting nothing to do with the chaos and destruction that often accompanied those who sought power. Yet here, in this cold, hidden refuge, Lyara was offering him something beyond anything he could imagine. "Power?" Caleb echoed, trying to make sense of it. "What kind of power? What are you talking about?" Lyara stood up, her movements slow but deliberate. She walked to the center of the room, her fingers brushing against the walls as if she were drawing energy from them. Caleb watched, his curiosity growing. "I am from a distant place in the universe, a civilization that has unlocked secrets of the stars. My people have the knowledge to alter the fabric of reality itself, to manipulate energy, time, and matter," she explained, her voice steady. "But it is not just about power for the sake of control. It is about understanding. My kind, we believe in balance. The reward I offer you, Caleb, is the opportunity to learn, truly understand, the forces that govern the universe." Caleb felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just some alien technology or a fleeting wish for power. She was offering something far more profound, an understanding that could change everything. He had always felt like an outsider, disconnected from the world around him. But to have the chance to actually comprehend the universe, to understand what lay beyond the veil of ordinary existence, it was tempting, more than he wanted to admit. But even as the thought took root, doubt crept in. "And why me? Why are you offering this to me? What makes me so special?" Lyara's eyes softened and a faint, almost sad smile touched her lips. "You have something within you, Caleb, a latent potential. It is rare, even among humans. You are not like the others. I can see it in you. This hunger for knowledge, for understanding. You've survived alone because your mind, your instincts are attuned to the deeper currents of the world. Your heart," she paused, her expression distant for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "Your heart is open to what others close themselves off from. That is why you were chosen." Caleb's mind raced. He had lived his life quietly, avoiding others, preferring the solitude of the wilderness. But Lyara had seen something in him, something he hadn't even recognized in himself. He could feel the weight of her words, and for the first time in his life, he questioned the choices that had led him to this moment. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Caleb admitted quietly, his voice hoarse. "I've been alone for so long. I'm not sure I can handle the responsibility that comes with this kind of power or understanding. I don't even know what it means." Lyara stepped closer to him, her presence both comforting and unnerving. "No one is truly ready," she said softly. "But you are stronger than you think. We all have choices in life, Caleb. Some are easy, others are not. But the ones that matter are the ones that shape our future." Caleb looked down at his hands, thinking of the years he had spent isolated from others. In many ways, he had been running from the world, from anything that demanded more from him. But now, faced with this alien woman who had seen potential in him, he wondered if perhaps it was time to stop running. "What happens if I accept?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Lyara didn't hesitate. "If you accept, you will be transformed. You will gain access to knowledge, wisdom, beyond anything you could imagine. But with it comes responsibility. You will be able to change the course of history, Caleb. Your decisions will affect not just your world, but others. The fate of entire civilizations may rest on your choices." Caleb felt the weight of her words settle deep within him. He had always lived life day by day, surviving the harsh conditions of the Alaskan wilderness with little regard for anything beyond his own survival. But now, that survival instinct was being tested in ways he never anticipated. He wasn't just fighting for his own life anymore. He was standing at the crossroads of something much larger. "What if I refuse?" he asked, though he wasn't sure if he really wanted to know the answer. Lyara's expression softened, and for the first time, she seemed vulnerable. "Then you will return to your life, as you know it. You will continue to survive, yes?" but you will never truly understand the depth of what is possible. You will remain in the dark, never knowing the truth of the universe, of your place within it. Caleb took a deep breath, the air thick with tension. He had spent so long avoiding anything that might tie him to the world, to others. But now, faced with the chance to truly understand, to grasp the very fabric of reality itself, he felt a pull he couldn't ignore. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady, though his heart raced with anticipation. "I'll accept. But I need to know one thing. What happens to you? What happens to you if I choose to take this power?" Lyara's eyes flickered with something unreadable, perhaps sorrow, perhaps relief. "I will be free," she said softly. "I have been bound to this world for far too long. The forces that hold me here, the ones that sent the hunters after me, will no longer have control over me. I will be able to return home, to my people." Caleb nodded, understanding the depth of her sacrifice. She had given him a chance, not just to change his own fate, but to change hers as well. In accepting her offer, he wasn't just gaining power. He was giving her the freedom she had been denied. "Then, let's begin," Caleb said, his voice firm with resolve. Lyara stepped forward, extending her hand to him. The air around them seemed to shift as she activated the energy embedded in the walls of the underground shelter. Caleb felt a sudden surge of heat, of power, coursing through his veins. His mind exploded with visions, stars, galaxies, entire worlds, all interconnected in ways he had never imagined. The knowledge flooded him, overwhelming him, and yet he felt more alive than he ever had. He could feel the universe shifting, the layers of reality unfolding around him. Time seemed to bend, and he realized that what Lyara had offered him wasn't just power. It was understanding. He saw the connections between everything, the way the universe moved and breathed, how every decision rippled out and affected the whole. He saw the patterns, the webs of fate that connected them all. And through it all, he understood something else. His journey had only just begun. As the knowledge settled within him, Caleb looked at Lyara, who was now glowing brighter than ever, her form shimmering with energy. She smiled, her eyes filled with both pride and sadness. "You are ready now, Caleb," she said, her voice soft. "You are ready to change everything?" And with that, the universe shifted once again. The hunters were no longer a threat. Caleb was no longer just a man struggling to survive. He was something more, something beyond human, a force that could reshape worlds. But even as the power surged within him, Caleb knew that the greatest challenge was yet to come. His choices, his actions, would shape the future. And now, more than ever, he understood the weight of that responsibility. The universe was waiting.